What is going on, gunfighters? Saddle up for another episode of Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way, with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. First and foremost, I am a Christian, a servant of God, and a follower of Jesus Christ. God has blessed me to do many things in my life, for I could do nothing apart from Him. U.S. Marine Corps combat veteran, did a couple of tours in Iraq. As an assaultman after my combat tours, I was an urban warfare instructor for the Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. Also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. Also did several years in law enforcement, LAPD. I worked regular assignments and more specialized assignments. Been a private contractor for a 3-letter government agency. That's all I'll say about that. Been blessed to be a state rifle and pistol champion and West Coast regional rifle champion. Won more shooting competitions with the talent that God's given me than I can actually remember. Was blessed to be the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. Our primary job, the reason we primarily existed, was to stop active shooters. I got the opportunity to head up and be the commander of that team. I grew up around guns, hunting and shooting and competing at a very early age. Been blessed to hunt all over this beautiful country, from whitetail on the East Coast to mule deer on the West Coast, and bear and elk and all manner of things. I've even been a professional big game hunter and guide. But again, most importantly, I'm a Christian. And I am your host, Michael Milito. Welcome to Gunfighter Life. Podcast topic is going to be on the Smith & Wesson M&P pistol and also the Glock handgun. Kind of a little bit of compare and contrast. You see, when I was been wanting to do a podcast on the M&P pistol for a while, as I said in the intro, I've got my own favorites and my own biases. And one of those is a Smith & Wesson M&P pistol. So, as you heard in the bio, I've done quite a bit of competition shooting, been blessed to win more competitions than I can remember. The majority of competition wins that I have is with a Smith & Wesson M&P pistol, namely the Smith & Wesson M&P Pro, the first generation. Way back when they were first coming out, way back when you could get them with a silver slide. So I'm letting you know right now that the Smith & Wesson M&P is one of my favorites. Now, I also have quite a bit of background with a Glock. When I got out of the Marine Corps, I went to work for LAPD. The first handgun I was issued was a Glock. We had to buy our own backup guns, but we got issued our duty gun, which was a Glock 22 40 caliber. I also shortly thereafter that bought a Glock 21 45, and I've owned and won many handguns, many Glock handguns over the years. In fact, next to the bed that my wife and I sleep in on one side is a Glock 17 Gen 5, and on the other side is a Smith & Wesson M&P 2.0. Those are usually found on either side of the bed, and they're both very good handguns. So before we get into, I guess, why a Smith & Wesson, or the pros and cons versus Smith & Wesson and Glock, let's talk a little bit about why polymer striker-fired handguns. So I think the reason for polymer striker-fired handguns and why they've become the predominant thing on the market is because they give you the most return on investment. You know, they are a very effective weapon. They are not super expensive to produce. They are effective. You know, for a general purpose police officer or somebody that wants a handgun for home protection or something like that, the polymer striker fire, I won't say it's the best choice, but it's the most obvious answer. I think that's why they're so prolific. And Glock certainly is not the first one to come up with a striker fire firearm, and they're certainly not the first ones to come out with a polymer framed handgun. But Glock, I think we can all admit, is the one that made that, you know, a common thing. They're the ones that made that polymer striker fire system kind of the go-to for handgun designs. And the vast majority of modern handguns that come out, I would venture easily to safely say that they were polymer striker-fired handguns. And in fact, I've heard it said from multiple sources that over half of all handguns that are sold are Glocks and Glocks alone. I don't know if that's still true, but for a time it was often quoted that they were the majority. Just the Glock handguns themselves were the majority of the handgun market. One of the things about the striker fire system is it's very simple. If you look at how a striker fire system works, it's a very simple design, which obviously has a few advantages. It makes it probably cheaper to produce. I'm not an engineer, a product manufacturer, but I assume the simpler something is, generally the easier or cheaper it is to produce. Also, it has less moving parts in general, so it's going to be less things that can go wrong. So it lends itself to being reliable. And then polymer also, again, fairly inexpensive to produce. And it also has the added advantage of a lightweight, and it absorbs some recoil. So actually, if you don't actually see it with your naked eye, but the polymer does, kind of flex and bend and can absorb some of that recoil. So you do get that added benefit. And those are some other reasons why, polymer striker-fired handguns have kind of become the go-to industry standard. Now let's talk about the Glock. Now Glock's slogan is Glock Perfection. I'd venture to question why, if it's perfection, they've had 5 different generations of it. But it certainly is an outstanding handgun. It certainly is an effective fighting tool. It certainly is a very simple, which I can greatly appreciate, simple, effective design. No, I'm looking at in front of me a Glock next to an M&P. And the Glock, you either think they look good or they don't. I mean, they have kind of, I'm not an architect. I guess if I was going to describe them as a building, it would be like a commercial building, like a commercial warehouse. Not a lot of frills, not a lot of fanciness. The building just gets the job done. And the Glock design is kind of like that. You look at the Smith & Wesson M&P, I'd consider it more like a shop storefront. Like, it still gets the job done. The building does what it's designed to do, but it has a little bit of style. A Glock has very few things on the design that are just there strictly for style and not for function. The M&P doesn't have many, but it has a few. It has some, fancier scallop serrations that are a little bit more decorative than they need to be. They're still certainly effective, but they just give it a little bit of style, a little bit of extra. They have a little bit better rounded corners. I don't think that anybody looking at those two pistols side by side, unless they were already a Glock fan, would say that the Glock, looked better than the M&P. It's just a more utilitarian design, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just pointing that out. Glock's quality control is amazing. For as many pistols, as many handguns as they pump out, for their quality to be controlled to be the way that it is amazing. It's not impossible. Glocks do have issues, but it's very rare, especially, like I said, for the amount of handguns that they produce. And nobody argues with a Glock's reliability. Individual Glocks may have problems when they introduce a new model. Every now and then it might have a problem. But in general, kind of, that is the Glock handgun reliability is kind of the standard now that other handguns aspire to be to. Their level and their ability to run in adverse conditions, run with different kinds of ammo, and go X amount of thousands of rounds. That's kind of the goal that other handguns aspire to now. Now, with that being said, why might one choose a Smith & Wesson M&P over a Glock? Well, the big reason, I shouldn't say the big reason. If this is important to you, Smith & Wesson M&Ps are made in America. And if you can buy American and it's a good product, as good or better than a foreign product, why would you not buy American if you can? Like I said, that's important to some people, not so important to other people. But the Smith & Wesson M&P is a made in America gun. The next reason I'll get into is the reason that I switched to M&P. So when I first started competition shooting handguns, I had started competition shooting rifles when I was even before the Marine Corps at 17. But when I started competition shooting handguns, started with a Glock. It was my duty weapon, a Glock 21, 45 ACP. I believe is the first handgun I ever shot a competition with. And quickly realized, number one, the Glock 21 was too big for my hands to shoot effectively. So ergonomics, and even with the smaller Glocks, like I said, my first duty issue handgun was the Glock 22. I've never been a real big fan of the 40 and a 9mm size handgun. But anyway, for competition shooting, I started with the Glock, and I quickly realized that I was putting myself in a disadvantage because I could not reach all of the controls on the Glock without manipulating it in my hand, meaning I had to do extra movement, in a reload, extra movement in the course of fire. And one of the keys to competition shooting and being really fast is to smooth out your actions and to do no superfluous motion. So don't do anything extra that you don't have to do. That's going to add time, and adding time lowers your score, and lowers your score does not make you a champion. So I switched to the M&P because it was something that I could reach. I could, reach the mag release on that gun. Also, just ergonomically, for me and for the vast majority of people, I think the Smith & Wesson M&P is more ergonomic than the Glock. Smith & Wesson, kind of their thing when they came on the market, they had the interchangeable back straps, and I really liked that. And a Glock came out with that later. I don't think the Glock changeable back straps, like I said, in the main handgun design, the Glock handgun back straps, they do change the size of the handgun grip, but they are nowhere near as ergonomic. They're just, technically there, whereas the M&P one kind of fills your hand, it's more ergonomic. So ergonomics would be another big reason one may choose the M&P. So I just think for a lot of people, the M&P is going to fit your hand better. The other thing that goes into the ergonomics is, you may know if you've listened to the podcast for some time, I like platforms based on the 1911, whether it's a 1911 itself, or whether it's like a STI 2011, a double stack 1911. I really like that platform. It lends itself to me very well for shooting into a lot of other people. The grip angle, the ergonomics of that are kind of legendary. And the Smith & Wesson M&P, if not exactly the same, is certainly far more similar to a 1911 than the Glock style of handgun is. And I like that. I like those ergonomics for me work better than the Glock. Another thing is, we all talked about Glock reliability. And one of the things that can go wrong on a Glock is the extractor. And I've shot Smith & Wesson M&Ps, like I said, a lot. I have one that I used and won more competitions with and put more rounds in than I can even recollect. And I know that Glock's extractors can be a thing, having issues. I've never heard of a Glock. I've never heard, as it were, a Smith & Wesson M&P extractor having issues. If you look at them, it's just kind of like a big piece of spring steel in there, big heavy-duty piece of steel. It's quite a bit bigger than the Glock extractor. It is a very robust design, and like I said, I've never even changed one out for maintenance, let alone had an issue with one. The Smith & Wesson M&P extractor, I think they really did a good job on that. I think they really did a good job on the upper part of the slide, especially getting to the next part. Another reason why one might want an M&P pistol is a Smith & Wesson M&P is a stainless steel slide. Now, they coat it. I don't know why. I guess people like black. They expect black. But unless they've changed it, from what I understand, the Smith & Wesson M&P slide is stainless steel. So if you like stainless steel, if you want stainless steel, the Smith & Wesson M&P comes in stainless steel. So their slide right out of the, just in the factory Smith & Wesson M&P, and like I said, unless they've changed it, is stainless steel. And if you like that, that's a thing. Also, the magazines, Glock magazines are kind of ubiquitous. They're kind of the standard. There's a bunch of aftermarket companies that make Glock mags, but if you're just talking a factory mag to factory mag, I like the Smith & Wesson M&P, just straight steel magazine design. Next, we'll get into triggers. These are polymer striker-fired handguns, so neither one of them I would consider to have, a top-tier trigger. They both have serviceable triggers. And this is the thing. I think going back to the ergonomics, I think the ergonomics on the Smith & Wesson M&P has a better shaped trigger, better ergonomics on the trigger. It's a flatter trigger generally. It's more natural to the hand. But one of the big things that Smith & Wesson didn't do great on the M&P is they could have really put a much better trigger pull in it than they did. A lot of the striker-fired handguns that came later had a little bit better trigger pull out of the box. So it really depends. The Glock trigger pull has changed a little bit from generation to generation. But I certainly wouldn't call the trigger pull itself any better on a Smith & Wesson M&P. That's one of the things I really think could have set it apart when it came out if they had put a better trigger in it. That being said, I was geared more towards the time when it came out for military and police. A military and police handgun, Smith & Wesson M&P. It's a service trigger. That being said, I do think it could be a bit better. So if you're one of the people that, for legal reasons, is not allowed to or not willing to change out the trigger in your handgun, or if you're somebody that just isn't going to do that, you may want to feel both triggers and see which one you like better. You lose a little bit, I think, in the actual trigger pull with the M&P, and you gain a little bit in the ergonomics. And especially if you have smaller hands, you may favor the Smith & Wesson M&P over a Glock. So from what I understand, I haven't bought any handguns. Oh, that's not true. I haven't bought any Smith & Wesson M&Ps fairly recently. I just don't think this is the season to be buying a ton of handguns and ammo right now, when all the prices are super high. So I haven't really messed with it, but I've heard that some of the newer, Smith & Wesson M&Ps trigger have gotten better, but then so have the Glock. Like the Glock Gen 5s, I would say have a better trigger than the Gen 3s that were around when I first started carrying one. So just some things to consider on the Smith & Wesson M&P. I'd also say that the Smith & Wesson M&P, most people when they buy a Glock, they just assume that they're going to have to change out the sights on that Glock. Most people don't run the factory plastic sights that come in a Glock. And the Smith & Wesson M&P comes with fairly decent metal classic 3-dot sights. Now, I don't like 3-dot sights. I usually take a Sharpie or something and black out the rear so I have a sharp contrast where only bright color I see is the front sight. But the Smith & Wesson comes with very good sights out of the box. You take and black out that rear sight, and you take a little bit of, like we talked about in one of the previous podcasts, a little bit of obnoxious colored nail polish and fill in that little dot on the front sight. And you have pretty good sights right out of the box on the Smith & Wesson M&P. So that's going to save you, 70 or so bucks depending on what kind of sights you want. That being said, there is obviously a lot more aftermarket support for a Glock than the Smith & Wesson M&P. Smith & Wesson M&P aftermarket has certainly come a long way. When I first got one, like I said, it was when they were very, very new on the market, the Smith & Wesson M&P, and there was almost none. I remember having to take a Dremel and hand tools and fit things and get things to work and, pretty much make my own trigger for competition shooting for the M&P because they really didn't make any aftermarket ones at the time. And just taking, different springs made for different things and, gunsmithing them into a Smith & Wesson M&P trigger. That being said, like I said, there's a lot more aftermarket support for an M&P now. It should not be an issue. Plenty of people shoot those in competition now. Plenty of people use those now. So it's not to the level of a Glock. Glocks are, I will say, easier in general to completely strip down and work on, especially the slide portion, than an M&P. But an M&P is still a very simple design, and it still has a lot more aftermarket support now than a lot of other handguns, but not as much as a Glock. So that is something to consider. And like I said, I'm not trying to hide my bias. I like the M&P. I prefer the M&P to a Glock. That being said, when I'll go to a training class or something, I'll generally switch over and run just a Glock 17 right out of the box with, factory option night sights when I'm going to a training class or something like that, or when I'm going to an academy, just so the guys on my team that are, especially the ones under me that work for me, when they see me shoot, they don't assume that it's because of a fancy gun. They know that, most of my guys run Glocks. Like I said, it is the most common handgun. So if my guys run Glocks and I'm doing a training class or demonstrating something for them, I'll generally run a Glock. And Glock does some really good competitions if you're looking to get in competition shooting. Their GSSF matches are amazing. They're very good and very beginner-friendly. Don't need a lot of equipment. Don't need to spend thousands of dollars to go shoot a match. So that's another good thing. But if you asked me to pick one, I would pick the Smith & Wesson M&P. Obviously, the Smith & Wesson M&P came about after the Glock, and it borrowed a lot of things from the Glock. I'm not, hiding that. That's a real thing. Obviously, they saw the success of Glock and came out with their own polymer striker-fired handgun in the Sigma, and then they greatly improved that in the M&P. But like I said, I have my favorite and my bias, and my favorite and bias is the M&P. I'm not telling you my choice is right for you. I'm not, trying to be arrogant and say that my choice is the right choice for everybody. I would say, though, if you're just like, what handgun should I get? Oh, default Glock. Maybe look at the M&P and see if it gives you any real advantages. Maybe the answer is no. Maybe the answer is yes. But, be a discerning man. Figure out which one of those is a better use of the talents and resources that God has blessed you with. And be thankful for all that you have and try and use your, like I said, talents and resources you've been blessed with and turn them into even more talents and resources. Like the parable that Jesus mentions, take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10. For to he who has, more shall be given, and he will have an abundance. And he who does not have, even what he has will be taken away from him. So be mindful, be circumspect, use the blessings and talents you've been given for the glory of God. Get out there, guys. There's a lot of other striker fire polymer handguns out there that are also good. You might want to look at those. Just in closing, maybe I'll do another episode on those. Before we wrap up today, if you like this podcast or any other ones that we do, I'd appreciate you hitting the like, subscribe, or comment button. Any of those will greatly help. Just leaving a comment will help. If you like this podcast, you may like a few others that we do. The Alpha Male podcast is about what it sounds like. And also Simple Man Sermons, if you care about the important stuff. Simple Man Sermons, the preachings of a simple man called by God to share the good news of Jesus Christ. You can find those likely on whatever platform you're listening to this on. If you want to see more, find out more, you can go to goodshepherdtraining.com, all one word, goodshepherdtraining.com. It'll have the other podcasts listed. If you forget, if you're a more visual guy, you can see some more photos on there. If you want to support financially, because these podcasts are free to listen to, but sadly they're not free to produce and put out, either in time or money. So if you would like to support that way, you can go to Patreon, and you can just type in Good Shepherd Training, or you can type in Gunfighter Life, or you can type in Alpha Male Podcast, or Simple Man Sermons. Find us on there. If you'd like to be a financial supporter of this community that you're now a part of. So if you'd like to support the community in that way, you can. If you want to give, give. If not, don't, and don't feel guilty about it. Thanks for listening to this episode of Gunfighter Life, guys. With that, I'll wrap up the topic. Thanks, and have a blessed day.